Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Kirsten Slaughter, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Economic Development Tools Workshop, sponsored by Compeer Financial, UW Center for Cooperatives, and Wisconsin Farmers Union. A few quick webinar housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to all registrants after. We will start with the presentations of all three topics, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So please ask those questions through the Q&A function, which helps us kind of separate other comments in the chat. You can find that by moving your mouse and clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And now I will turn it over to Kelly Maynard to introduce our speakers and the topics. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsten. So I'm Kelly Maynard. I'm a co-op development specialist with the UW Center for Cooperatives, and I'll be introducing our speakers today. First, we're going to have Deb Fabritz and Joe Friesen discuss Wisconsin's crowdfunding law. Deb and Joe are with the Wisconsin Division of Securities, which is part of the larger Department of Financial Institutions. Deb is the Director of Professional Registration and Compliance Bureau, and Joe is a securities examiner with a focus on filings made by entities who are raising capital. Deb and Joe were both involved in the division's launch of an online crowdfunding filing system after the Wisconsin legislature passed Act 52 in 2013. Joe has reviewed every crowdfunding filing submitted to the division since the law became effective in June 2014. Deb and Joe will talk about how intrastate crowdfunding can be used to raise business capital in Wisconsin and what filings are required to be made with the division. Go ahead, Deb and Joe.
Thanks. Joe will get the slides started. And as Kelly described, Joe and I are both with the Division of Securities, which is part of the larger Department of Financial Institutions. The department has separate divisions for banking, credit unions, and corporations, as you might be aware if you make corporate filings with us. We're happy to be joining you today to talk about crowdfunding. Like a lot of folks, we have been working remotely for quite some time now, more than a year, and we have not had a lot of opportunities to give virtual presentations or other outreach. Joe's advancing the slides for me, and I'll remind him if I'm ready to switch over. Today, we're going to be briefly describing what we do in the division, which includes oversight of capital raising in Wisconsin through the offering of securities. And we'll, of course, be focused on crowdfunding, which has not been used as much as we might have expected when the law was initially passed in 2013. And at that time, Joe and I were both very involved in creating a new online filing system so our division could begin accepting crowdfunding filings through our website. If you're raising money through a securities offering, you should be familiar with our division and the Wisconsin securities law and our website. Our general mission is to protect investors, and we do this in a number of ways through our two bureaus. Joe and I are with the bureau that provides oversight to registered firms, individuals, and securities products. Our examiners handle registration applications, examine investment advisors and broker-dealers, and investigate potential violations of the securities law. The Enforcement Bureau has its own examiner staff, and they investigate primarily unregistered activity, or as I like to refer to it, the frauds and scams. And often these cases involve someone who sold unregistered securities to investors and then unfortunately misappropriated the money. The definition of a security is quite broad. It includes stocks, bonds, and various other instruments that fall within a statutory definition. So oftentimes our first step is to look at whether something is in fact a security. If a person or business is offering a security in Wisconsin, it must be either registered or exempt from registration. There's quite a bit of information on our website under the Securities dropdown regarding registration and exemption requirements. We also have a phone line staffed by the examiners if you'd like to take advantage of that. If an offering is not exempt, well, then it must be registered, which involves filing an application and prospectus with our office for review. The primary difference between a qualification and a coordination registration filing, which is listed here, is that the coordination filings are also made with the SEC. If an issuer is relying on a federal exemption, a notice filing with our division may be required. Two of the most common notice filings that we receive for federal exemptions are under Reg A and Reg D. And Reg D is the one that we see with the greatest frequency. Partly because those are often used for private placements, hedge funds, and venture capital funds. The Wisconsin securities law has a large number of exemptions, which can be reviewed on our website. We would sometimes joke that if you could not find an exemption that applied, that maybe you were not looking hard enough. An offering may be exempt. Well, we're still on the last slide for just another minute or so. An offering might be exempt from registration based on the type of security or the nature of the transaction. For instance, if an offering is made to a limited number of investors and is exempt for that reason, that is a transaction-based exemption. Another common example is an offering made to accredited investors. A filing may need to be made with our division, or the exemption may be self-executing, in which case no filing is required. Crowdfunding is an exemption that's based on the nature of the transaction, and it does require filing with our division. So now we're on to the next slide. So as the term suggests, crowdfunding refers to raising money from numerous individual investors who make up essentially the crowd. The very first type of crowdfunding, which still does exist, did not involve securities at all. Rather, money was given or donated without an expectation of much in return. For instance, when my nephew was in a band and they wanted to raise some money so that they could produce a CD, our nephew asked us to make a donation to that effort, which we happily did, and eventually we received a copy of the CD, maybe a t-shirt, but did not have any other interest in the band. So donation-based crowdfunding very often involves the receipt of a product, but not a security. About 8 years ago or so, states, including Wisconsin, began adopting laws to allow crowdfunding within the borders of the state. And this was a relatively still is a relatively cost-effective way for a business to raise money from investors. These securities can be either equity, as in stock, or debt. There's a cap on how much can be raised, but the initial raise can oftentimes be a stepping stone to further funding, such as a bank loan. Later, federal crowdfunding began to sort of catch up. And in Wisconsin, this could be appealing because you can raise money from investors who are outside of the state, and you can also raise a greater total amount of money under the federal law. At this point, Joe's going to go into a little more depth on each of these crowdfunding types and the requirements in Wisconsin.
Thanks, Deb. So let's take a closer look at the different types of crowdfunding. With rewards or donation-based crowdfunding, like Deb said, there is no expectation of financial gain. Here from Indiegogo, we have an example of some super fans of the TV show Star Trek Voyager looking to fund a new documentary on the series. There are over 8,000 backers of this campaign currently, and maybe they're getting a perk like a poster or a copy of the movie, but the main reason they are contributing is to make the movie. Likewise, over on GoFundMe, people are donating to rebuild a barn that had burned down. Again, personal financial gain is not part of the equation here. People just want to help rebuild the barn. For some history into intrastate crowdfunding, back in 2012, the Obama administration passed the Jobs Act. Part of that bill was the promise of nationwide securities-based crowdfunding. At the time, this was a new concept for how companies could raise money, and there was a lot of genuine excitement around it. The Securities and Exchange Commission was tasked with implementing the new provision, and unfortunately, the rulemaking process took longer than anticipated. As such, a few entrepreneurs worked with the state legislature here in Wisconsin to make Wisconsin one of the first states to adopt new rules to do crowdfunding on the state level. Jump forward to today, and here on the map you see that the majority of states across the country have followed Wisconsin's lead to take it upon themselves and move forward with crowdfunding on a state-by-state basis. Now, I'll define some of the key terms and elements of Wisconsin intrastate crowdfunding. The issuer is the entity raising money. Issuers could be anything from a bakery down the street to a new tech startup, a business just starting out, or an established business funding their next level of growth. And while it could be anything, for whatever reason, one industry has dominated our filings. We'll see if you can spot the pattern later on. The internet site operator is the website that hosts the offering. Now, these sites typically look very similar to Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or GoFundMe, but different from those entities, they are actually registered with the Wisconsin Division of Securities as internet site operators. They usually have a little profile about the company and to tell you a little bit more about why they're raising money. And then the internet site operators will require people to verify that they are Wisconsin residents to see more information about the offering in the private placement memorandum or the offering document. These crowdfunding raises must be made exclusively through the internet site operators because they help track who has invested how much money and verify the Wisconsin residency. It's also a requirement that the internet site operators must be unrelated to the issuers. This is to keep an arm's length distance between the entities, so to reduce conflicts of interest. In an attempt to keep the invested money secure at all times, investment funds must be held by an escrow agent during the offering, which can be released when the minimum raise has been met. For fundraising limits, there are two tiers that issuers can find themselves in. For issuers that want to reduce the complexity and cost of the offering and do not have audited financials, they can raise up to $1 million. On the other hand, if the company does provide audited financials to DFI as well as to investors, they are able to raise up to $2 million. And while these limits are lower than what is available under, say, Reg A or Reg D offerings, $2 million can still go a long way in helping a company out, especially in the early stages of the company. For investors, they are able to invest up to $10,000 per investor unless they qualify as an accredited investor or a certified investor. The reason for that is that we realize that investing in companies, often companies with limited operating history, is an inherently risky investment. Many companies that do everything right sometimes just don't make it. So we assume that folks with substantial means are in a better place to weather that risk. And if you're asking yourself, well, I've heard about accredited investors, but I don't know what certified investors are, that's definitely understandable. The accredited investor definition is set by the SEC, while the certified investor definition was made up by the Wisconsin legislature. As you can see here, it's similar, but more permissive than the accredited investor definition. So here are a few examples of companies that have gone through the process to raise money under the Wisconsin intrastate crowdfunding exemption. Mobcraft Beer was funded by a recent UW Whitewater grad in Madison. A couple of years into their operation, they were able to raise $75,000 from 57 investors. They were able to use those funds to expand their distribution, and now they have a tap room in Milwaukee and sell beer across the country. At the time they filed with DFI, Common Man Brewing was just an idea on a business plan. They went on to raise $20,000 from 9 investors. And while they didn't raise as much as they had hoped, they were able to put the money towards opening their own brew pub. And on a side note, if you ever find yourself in Ellsworth, Wisconsin, be sure to treat yourself to a burger from Common Man. You won't regret it. And now our third business in a row, it's probably evident that our most successful issuers have all been in the craft beer business. I'm not exactly sure what that says about the investment taste of Wisconsin investors, but it is what it is. Agonic Brewing also did an equity raise, but it's important to note that issuers can also use debt securities instead of equity. So if you're worried about a cluttered cap table, debt can help alleviate some of those issues. Agonic was able to raise $53,000 from 95 investors to renovate an old mill and start a microbrewery up in Rice Lake. Unfortunately, they were set to open up in March of last year, precisely when everything was shutting down across the state. Worse yet, all the beer that they had brewed for the opening ended up spoiling. As such, the original owners just recently sold the business to another entity that will carry forward the brewery. The division is following up with the original owners to see how the sale impacted the original investors, because this is the first exit like this for a company using Wisconsin intrastate crowdfunding. If you're wondering how to get started with Wisconsin intrastate crowdfunding, we would suggest by contacting an internet site operator. They have the experience to know what works and what doesn't, how to craft your disclosure documents, as well as how to navigate the process from the perspective of the issuer. The filing requirements really are pretty straightforward. We require that the issuers file a notice on our website 10 days before the offering starts. There's a $50 filing fee, which can be paid online. And lastly, there are 2 documents to upload: the disclosure document and an escrow arrangement with the bank that's holding the funds. We understand at DFI that there may be some sensitive information or trade secrets in these documents. So while both of these documents are uploaded to our website, they are not publicly available. More information about Wisconsin intrastate crowdfunding can also be found on our website below. And to give you an idea of what it looks like to actually file on our website, this is kind of a taste for that. It really is pretty straightforward. Just fill in some information, upload some documents, and pay the fee. The last type of crowdfunding that we'll discuss here today is federal securities crowdfunding. So while it did take a while for the SEC to finalize their rules, they did eventually do it. And what we have is a framework that allows issuers to raise up to $5 million from investors in any state across the country. The issuers still need to go through portals, but instead of being registered with the Wisconsin Division of Securities, they need to be registered with FINRA, which is another regulatory body. In 2020 alone, 1,000 companies were able to raise over $214 million across 68 portals. The most commonly used portals were WeFunder and Start Engine. And again, they look pretty similar to Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And as this market matures, we really are seeing pretty strong growth on the federal crowdfunding space. A couple of resources to note here. We have found that the law and entrepreneurship clinics at UW-Madison and Marquette have been really helpful with getting these smaller companies ready to file with the division. While the division only charges $50, oftentimes attorney's fees can be one of the largest expenses when filing. So these clinics can help offset some of those expenses. Deb earlier referenced that the other state-specific exemptions, which can be found at that link below. The filing requirements for those exemptions do vary greatly in time and complexity, so it's really worth reading up on them individually to see if they could be a good fit for your situation. The regulated portals for federal crowdfunding can also be found at the FINRA link. Again, we said that there's 68 of them as of today. And lastly, we'd like to point out that if anybody has questions about crowdfunding or any other capital raising avenues that might intersect with the division, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at the contact information provided on the next slide. But if you have any more generic questions for the division, you can always reach out to us at the Examiner of the Day hotline. Either myself or one of my colleagues is always staffing the hotline, and we're happy to help answer questions you might have or point you in the right direction. With that, here's our contact information, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today about the division broadly and Wisconsin interstate crowdfunding. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deb and Joe. This is exciting. I'm learning a lot too, so just taking notes. And just a reminder to everyone, we are going to hold off on questions until everyone has presented. So if there were questions that came up for you during that presentation, feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll work through those when we get to the question time. So next, we're going to learn about the Industrial Revenue Bond program from Lynda Templen and Steve Sabatke. Lynda is a partner at Husch Blackwell LLP and has focused her legal practice on public finance. Known as the bond queen of Wisconsin by her peers, she's considered the expert in the area of tax-exempt and municipal debt because of her 30-year legal career in handling bond issuances for public and private clients. And she handles almost all of the industrial revenue bond projects in the state. Steve is a financial underwriting manager with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Steve has been with WEDC since its formation in 2011. And prior to that, he worked for WEDC's predecessor, the Wisconsin Department of Commerce, primarily underwriting economic development financial assistance applications. Steve has overseen the state of Wisconsin's industrial revenue bond program since 1998. And so, Lynda, I have the slides, so I will get those up.
Kelly, you're going to advance the slides for us then, right?
Yeah, just give me a cue when you want me to move forward.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about small issue industrial revenue bonds and how they can assist with a project. They aren't for everybody because there are certain qualifications you have to meet. And we'll go through those very quickly and hopefully a hypothetical or two. Next slide. First of all, to qualify for a small issue IRB, you must be classified as a manufacturing company. And one might automatically think, well, I know what a manufacturing company is and I do or don't qualify. We have to go a little deeper than that. A manufacturer is one who manufactures or produces some tangible personal property. And that process could include anything that results in a change of the condition of the property. I like to say you take something and you change it in a way that adds value. So simply putting together the example I use, if you do a package and you have an assembly line and it has a baby bib, a baby rattle, and you put that into a box and shrink wrap it and call it a gift box, that's not manufacturing. You didn't change a product that added value. You simply packaged the product in a particular way. Next slide, please. However, sometimes we say that a project, we think we know what manufacturing is, and it's not apparent that something really is manufacturing. The example there is, I've done a number of projects for facilities that look like a warehouse, like a refrigerated warehouse. And yet what they do at that warehouse is they age cheese. Well, the aging of cheese as determined by the private letter ruling, is in fact core manufacturing. It's necessary to the production of cheese. So if you extrapolate that, while a cheesemaker could be a manufacturer, so could the facility that's used to age the cheese. Same thing with someone who makes wine or pickles or sauerkraut, things that need to be aged. A meat locker that cuts meat to spec and ages that meat. A bond is used, the maximum size of any bond that can be issued under federal law is $10 million. In addition, in order to qualify as being a small manufacturer, the company's capital expenditures in the municipality where the project is located in a 6-year window that begins 3 years before the bonds and ends 3 years after the bonds, total capital expenditures can exceed $20 million. That is sometimes difficult if you think about a printer. A printer is a manufacturer. However, they may have an expansion project that they're going to add a printing press, and that printing press costs $7 million. And the building to house that press costs $5 million. Well, there's 12 already. And if you have to look 3 years before and 3 years after, they may not be classified as small. So that's kind of a technical rule. You must be classified as small, and what you do must be manufacturing. Next slide, please. There are certain prohibited projects. We call these kind of the 12 deadly sins. You cannot ever use a tax-exempt bond to finance any of those items that are listed on the list. So airplanes, skyboxes, massage parlors, gambling facilities, basically the vices not included, can't do a bond for them. Next slide. So here's a hypothetical. Widget company wants to build an 80,000 square foot facility in Anytown, Wisconsin. It's going to cost about $6.2 million. They currently own and operate their manufacturing business in a smaller facility that's also located in Anytown. They have 75 employees. They plan to sell the existing facility. They will move equipment to the new facility, and that equipment will cost about $1 million. Well, when I look at a project like this, my first question, based on what I said before, is Widget Company a manufacturer? Well, yes, they make widgets. So we've determined they're a manufacturer. But now we're looking at, are they a small manufacturer? And we determine that by looking at their expenditures in Anytown. It doesn't matter if they have another facility in Bug Tussle. We're looking only at the place where the project is located. For a project this size, $6.2 million for the building, $1 million for the equipment. We know they're at 7.2. We look back at their capital expenditures. They've had existing operations in Anytown. We aggregate those. We take a look at what their usual and customary are. And usually a project of this size is probably going to fall under the cap. So they would qualify. Next slide. But if we use the same facts and instead we say that they want to buy an existing facility in Anytown and they're hoping to lease the space to a third party. Well, now we've raised some more questions. First of all, the ability to use tax-exempt bonds operates under a principle that it's creating an incentive for the company to expand. And as a result of that incentive, we're getting more jobs, we're getting more taxable property, we're getting construction jobs to build the building, but here they're going to buy an existing facility. And so another rule comes into play. You can use bonds to buy an existing facility that will be used as a manufacturing facility, but then you must do qualified rehab to that facility in a 2-year period. And so again, it doesn't preclude using that bond proceeds for an existing facility, but it does add another layer of analysis. And then finally, if they don't want to use all the space and they're going to lease part of that space to a third party, that's okay if the third party is also a manufacturer. But if the third party is not a manufacturer, then we would have to kind of cut that section off. That amount of the cost attributable to that 20,000 square feet would not qualify to be paid for with tax exempt bonds. Next slide. Tax exempt bonds provide a direct monetary benefit because the bondholder is not going to pay federal income tax on the interest income that they derive. And as a result, they're willing to accept a lower interest rate. Right now, most of the bonds are being structured where the bondholder is simply the bank. The bond at its center is just like a bank loan. It's not free money, it's cheaper money. I always tell people there's three kinds of money. There's free money, that's a grant, direct grant. There's cheap money, that's a tax exempt bond. And then there's your money. Next slide, please. So the savings right now, if you borrowed $5 million for a qualified project, that means that you would save approximately $40,000 to $60,000 a year in interest costs. Again, the bond is bigger, $20 million. You would save about $160,000 to $250,000. A small issue IRB is never going to be at 20 million because we said the max is 10. There are a couple other categories that we're not going to talk about today, but once in a while you'll have like a solid waste facility or something like that that is not limited by that 10 million. So while it's not a way to get cash up front, it's borrowed money. You're borrowing it at a lower rate. It's cheap money. Next slide, please. So how do you go about accessing tax-exempt financing? There must always be a local governmental unit that's the issuer of the bonds. And most often, that issuer is the city, village, or town in which the project is located. The rules vary from state to state, but in Wisconsin, I would say, on the small issue IRBs, 99% of them are done through the local municipality. But the municipality is not guaranteeing the debt. The municipality is simply a conduit. It at the time we close on the bonds, that city, village, or town assigns away all its rights, responsibility, liability for the bonds. It's simply kind of a synthetic structure that's set up in the tax code that says you can't have tax exempt bonds unless there's a municipal issuer. But in this instance, it's a conduit issuer and they have no liability. So they can help you by providing a direct benefit. We measured it in dollars in the previous slide at no cost to them. Next slide, please. Some of the potential conduit issuers I've listed here, as I said, cities, villages, and towns. Counties under Wisconsin law can be issuers, but they don't do that very often. Often cities and villages will have redevelopment or community development authorities. They can be the issuer of bonds. Statewide issuers, WIDA issues for housing bonds, WIFA for not-for-profit bonds. And then we also have a national issuer, the Public Finance Authority. Next slide, please. And choosing that conduit issuer, sometimes I just listed some of the reasons where we might not go to the city, village, or town. It could be the type of project, it would be governed by state statute, maybe it's a housing project. It could be the location of the project. Maybe the company has two locations and we want to use a single issuer. Sometimes you run into an issuer that's never done bonds and they're very afraid of bonds. That used to be the case more with towns. However, over the years, I've done a lot of conduit issues through towns and they've gotten much more comfortable. And then in some limited instances, the bonds may, depending on the issuer, also be have a state tax exemption. Next slide, please. Now, Steve is going to talk about one of the other requirements, and that's volume cap. It's not a scary concept, but every state can only use so many of these tax exempt bonds to benefit projects. They're called private activity bonds. And in Wisconsin, the WEDC monitors that, and they review every project by application. And Steve is an underwriter who analyzes most of them. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Lynda. As Lynda mentioned in her presentation, a part of the process to receive IRB or an industrial revenue bond financing is to apply for an allocation of volume cap, which is simply the authority that allows the project to proceed for this type of financing. If it's a small issue manufacturing project that Lynda talked about, the volume cap allocation would come from us at WEDC as we administer the state's volume cap allocation for the small issue manufacturing projects. And the application is relatively painless. And the way to start the process is to contact our regional economic development directors or REDs. And those are the people that work for WEDC that represent different areas of the state. So the best way to start is to contact the RED that represents the area that you are located in, and the address that you see there at WEDC.org, which is the WEDC website. That'll take you to a very nice, colorful map that we have that illustrates the areas of the state that each RED represents, and then it also contains the contact information for each RED. The RED will walk you through the application process. If you have questions about the IRB program, you can ask them. If they don't know the answer, they'll ask me. And if I don't know the answer, I ask Lynda, because as she said, she does most of the IRB deals that come through our office, and her and I have been working together for many, many years. As far as the application process is concerned, as she mentioned, I'm typically the one that reviews or underwrites the application. The application then goes through a couple of levels of approval before the allocation of volume cap is ultimately certified by either our secretary or our deputy secretary. The time that it takes to go from underwriting, from the time that it gets in my hands to final approval, on average, it's about 3 to 4 weeks. It can sometimes be more than that, depending on the volume of projects that our underwriting team is working on at the time. Just a couple of notes about the application. We do ask for information about the business, what the business does, information about history, ownership, management. We want to get information from the business about what the project is, why it's being done, what the economic impact is, meaning how many new jobs are going to be created as a result, what is the new capital investment. We also ask for historical financial statements for the last 3 fiscal years. That is part of the application. And once you close on the bond issue, once you get through the entire process and the bonds are issued, then there is a fee that is submitted to us, which represents 0.1% of the amount of the bond issue. So if you have a $2 million bond issue, the closing fee is $2,000. That is the fee that goes to WEDC. A couple of things I wanted to mention that came to mind as Lynda was talking is, here, the 2 big questions I get a lot about this is, does the money for this come from WEDC? It does not. The formula that is used to figure out Wisconsin's volume cap each year, which by the way we split between us and WEDA, which uses theirs for housing, roughly it's about $300 million. We do not have $300 million sitting in an account somewhere that allows us to distribute those funds for industrial revenue bond deals. As Lynda mentioned, you have to have a lender get involved, and that's where the funding comes from. The other question that we get a lot is WEDC an issuer of these bonds? We are not. As Lynda mentioned, that can go through either the municipality or through the city, the county, the township, or wherever the project is located. And she provided information on issuers. We are not an issuer. So we're not a lender, we're not an issuer. But I do want to say this, that the Reds are the first point of contact between a business and us, the organization, WEDC. So if you have questions about any of our programs, whether it's IRBs, we've got tax credit programs, grant programs, loan programs. We have programs designed to help you with exporting. We have programs that are designed to help communities with redevelopment. We have brownfield grant programs. If you have questions about any of those, please feel free to contact the Red in your area. They will have information for you about those programs. And even if you have questions about expanding a business, starting a business, what resources are available, whether it's technical assistance resources or financial assistance resources that may come from other entities other than us, please contact the Reds as well. They are very, they have the information, a lot of information that they can give to you to help you with whatever question that you may have about business development, business expansion. That's what they're there for, to assist you. So that's pretty much what I have to report as far as WEDC's role in this program and for the application for volume cap for industrial revenue bonds.
Thank you so much, Steve and Lynda. I'm going to stop sharing. So for our final speaker and topic, we have John Cameron to discuss tax incremental financing, or TIF. John is a senior municipal advisor with Ehlers Public Finance Advisors, a firm that provides economic development services to public sector clients in Wisconsin and several other states. John will discuss TIF and how it can be used by rural municipalities to support development and expansion of processing facilities for agricultural products.
Thanks, Kelly, and good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be with you. I'm going to give a brief overview of tax incremental financing. So whenever we start one of these presentations and we talk about tax incremental financing, kind of the first question here is, what is it? It really is the primary economic development tool that municipalities have for attracting and retaining jobs and economic development within the state. It allows municipalities to capture the incremental property tax revenue from growth in a defined area and use that revenue to benefit that area by paying for specific project costs that are contained within a project plan document. So one of the questions that we get asked when we work on tax incremental finance is, what's the difference between a TIF and a TID? So TIF is tax incremental financing. That is the actual tool itself. A TID is a tax incremental district, and that really is the geographic area where the tool is being used, the boundary of the tax incremental finance district. So TIF was originally created in 1975, and the original intent was to allow for really to counteract the economic downturn during the mid-1970s, but really it requires kind of a cost participation amongst all taxing jurisdictions that then ultimately benefit from that increase in property value. So kind of satisfying that but-for test that I'll talk about here in a few slides. Like I said, it really promotes and is the most powerful tool that we have in the toolbox for promoting economic development and redevelopment. It also then helps to address a lack of other incentives and that we have that other states may have available that we just don't in Wisconsin, and as well as promoting cooperation between public and private sector entities. So in terms of how it works, I think this is probably the best chart that we have to be able to demonstrate how tax incremental financing works. The first step in the process, kind of on that top right-hand side, is defining the boundary, the geographic boundary. So in this example, we've got 8 parcels. It has to, when you draw a boundary for a tax incremental finance district, it has to include the whole parcel, even though development may occur on only a portion of it. Either the parcel has to be subdivided prior to the creation of the district, or you're bringing in the entire value and area of the district. The district also has to be contiguous in nature. So in this example, you have 8 parcels all next to each other going across one street. That's totally fine, but you can't cherry pick parcels within the municipality. You can't jump from parcel to parcel. You have to make sure that the boundary is contiguous in nature. So in this example, we've got 8 parcels that have a total equalized value of $500,000. At the time the tax incremental finance district is established, that base value is frozen for the life of the district, and that $500,000 will continue to be taxed as it normally would be. In fact, all 8 parcels will continue to be taxed even as they grow in value as they normally would. So in this example on our pie chart in yellow here on the bottom right-hand side, that shows our overall tax rate of, in this hypothetical, $20 a thousand, which really isn't that far off on an equalized value basis for a lot of probably cities and villages. Townships, we'd see probably a little bit lower overall property tax rate. But in this example, the way it breaks down is the local municipality has a tax rate of $6.50 per thousand. The county is at $4, the school district at $7.50, and the vocational technical college is at $2 to add up to a total of $20. So after the district is created and these properties develop or redevelop, anything above the 500,000 is called incremental value. So over a 20-year lifespan, this area, as it grows and redevelops or develops, goes from a value of 500,000 to a value of a little over 4 million. Again, that these properties will continue to be taxed at the same way they normally would. The difference is this full $20 a thousand, instead of a portion going to the county, the school, the tech college, the properties are taxed at that full value, but the tax revenue that is received stays with the municipality to pay for project costs within the district boundary. From an implementation and rule standpoint, one thing I'll kind of point out, so cities and villages have had tax incremental financing ability again since the mid-1970s. Towns, on the other hand, have kind of lagged a little bit in terms of their use of tax incremental financing. In the early 2000s, what is now State Statute 60.85 provided all towns with very limited TIF authority. What I'd say in general across the state is that this town TIF ability is not very widely used because it is significantly constrained to specific purpose. That would be agricultural, forestry, or manufacturing and tourism as defined under the statute. The one that is a little bit more widely used, and it's more for urban townships, would be in 2014, Wisconsin Act 193 provided the ability to create towns for TIFs for towns that met minimum threshold, and that is a population of at least 3,500 or greater, an equalized value of at least 500 million or greater. And then the boundary itself must be within a defined sewer service area, and those properties that would be served must have sanitary sewer service really at the time of occupancy. In terms of the requirements for creation of a tax incremental finance district, the statute has a limitation in terms of the amount of value that can get pulled into tax incremental finance districts, and that's commonly referred to as the 12% test. And that actually is 7% for towns that would do a town TID under statute 60.85. And what that is the total incremental value in any existing districts plus the base value, so the value at the time a new district would be created, cannot exceed either 12 or 7% for towns under this specific TID law of the total equalized value in the municipality. Furthermore, at the time the district is created, the district must fall under one of these different categories, either a blighted district, conservation rehab, environmental, industrial, or mixed use, and at least 50% of the area within the boundary of the TID must fall under one of these different buckets. The most commonly used type of district is a mixed use district in the state, and that is a portion of the district would be suitable for a combination of industrial, commercial, or a limited amount of newly platted residential development. Once you establish your boundary, the next step is to prepare a project plan. And that really is something that we spend at Ehlers a fair amount of our time working on, is different project plans for either creations or amendments across the state. The plan itself must have the purpose of the district, talk about the details of the boundary, the future projects. It must identify the project costs. It also then has to have a financing plan with a cash flow analysis. And really one of the ways to satisfy the but-for test that I'll talk about next here is that the amount of incremental value and the revenue that would be coming into the district through incremental tax revenue would be sufficient to pay for the project costs within the district. So like I said, one of the kind of the key underlining of tax incremental finance is what's known as the but-for test. And that test is really established as part of that project plan document. And it states that but for the use of tax incremental financing, the development would either not occur, period, not occur as proposed within the time frame that is described in the plan and that the municipality would like to see, or within the same level of value and quality that the municipality would like to see. Procedurally, there is a series of steps that have to be gone through to create a TID. Like I said, the first step is doing the project plan document. Once that gets done, there is a meeting of the Joint Review Board, and the Joint Review Board is made up of 5 members. There is a representative of each of the different taxing jurisdictions in the municipality. So the municipality has a member. It's usually the chief elected official, but not always. There is a member of the public that is recommended by the municipality and voted on by the rest of the Joint Review Board members. There's a member of the county, the school board, and the technical college. So there is an organizational meeting up front that usually, but not always, takes place the same night as the Plan Commission meeting. And at the Plan Commission, there's a public hearing on the proposed tax incremental finance district. And then there's a resolution that the Plan Commission would adopt, recommending the boundaries and the project plan onto the town, village, or city council. After that, the governing body, so that town board, village board, city council, adopts a resolution approving the tax incremental finance district. When you talk about the creation date of a district, Districts have different lifespans based on state statute and the type of district. The official creation date in terms of when the time clock starts is the date that the governing body approves that resolution. After that period of time, there is a final joint review board meeting, and at that meeting, the joint review board is taking an up or down, yes or no vote that the project plan and the proposed tax incremental finance district meets the but-for test. And then there's a state approval. So there's a series of documents, the resolutions, the project plan, some other filings that have to be sent to the Department of Revenue to certify the district. There's a number of different eligible project costs under state statute. Some of the more commonly used ones are certainly your public works and public improvement type projects, your road extensions, road costs, water, sewer, kind of your typical projects that you think about to allow development to occur, but certainly financing costs that would go along with debt financing any of those projects. Property assembly or land write-down costs are eligible. Any of your professional service type costs to allow the district to happen. Development contributions, either on a pay-as-you-go basis or as part of an overall financing, are certainly allowable. Project costs, environmental remediation, relocation costs, as well as project costs within a half-mile radius of the district, provided they benefit the district itself. Prohibited project costs would be costs for expanding administrative, police, fire, community, recreational, library, and school buildings. That's kind of the bigger one. Certainly any costs that would be unrelated to the TIF district itself. The cost for constructing or expanding facilities, if the same facilities would be financed only with user charges. And then costs associated with newly platted residential development, with the exception of within mixed use development, providing it qualifies. In terms of the district, most districts either have a 20-year or a 27-year lifespan. Along with that, you have specific time periods under state statute to be able to make expenditures. And that is generally 5 years less than the maximum lifespan of the district. So for example, if you have a 20-year mixed use district, you can make expenditures all the way up to that 15th year. There are things that you can continue to pay on after the expenditure period has sunsetted. So if you issue debt up front to do, say, a road project, and that debt offering extends out for 20 years, you can continue to make principal and interest payments after the expenditure period is over. You could also continue to make contractually obligated expenses, pay-go type arrangements for developer contributions. Those sorts of things can be made after the expenditure period, but you must enter into the expenditure itself prior to the expenditure period ending. Districts remain open until either its maximum life is reached under statute. You've either collected revenue sufficient to be able to pay your total obligations, or the municipality sometimes will voluntarily close a district if nothing is really happening, or if you're, say, over your 12% or 7% threshold and you want to create a new district, you can voluntarily close it at that time. At the closure, if there are surplus funds within the district, those funds are proportionately distributed to the other taxing jurisdictions. So there's a mutual benefit or sharing of the success of the district. On the flip side, if the district closes with a liability, debt that is still owed, or advances that are still owed to a general fund or utility, that risk is not shared with the other taxing jurisdictions. That risk remains with the town, village, or city. Like I said, there are a number of different district types. It's generally mixed use, industrial, blighted, rehab, conservation, or environmental remediation. It's either a 20 or a 27-year life, depending on the type of district. Mixed use and industrial have 20-year lifespans. blighted, conservation, rehab have 27, and environmental rehab have 27-year lives. When it comes to financing projects with tax incremental financing, there are several different options for getting projects done once a TIF district has been established. Traditional method would be the community fronts the cost. They issue general obligation debt or revenue bond debt, or do advancement from other funds. And as increment comes in, the increment pays back the debt offering. There's also what's called pay-as-you-go funding. That would be establishing through a development and agreement the ability that as a developer, the developer fronts the costs within a TIF district. And then as certain milestones are met, an increment becomes available. That increment is paid back to the developer to pay off those project costs. Both of these methods are widely used. And what I would say is, in general, what we see within tax incremental financing is kind of, in a lot of cases, a combination of community traditional financing and pay-as-you-go financing. The advantage to pay-as-you-go financing is it puts skin in the game for the developer to produce. It also alleviates the burden of the municipality having to do the upfront financing. So in summary, TIF is still really kind of from a municipality standpoint, the biggest and most important tool in the toolbox to attracting and retaining economic development. It does require active management by the municipality. It's not just something you create and just let it run. It is something that, from a municipality standpoint, you do have to be actively involved with. There are annual reporting requirements. There's auditing requirements that you have to be able to do during its lifespan. And it's really something that, you really have to kind of engage, folks both from the private side as well as, those within your organization to be able to create the district and be able to ensure its success. So with that, I'm happy to turn it back over.
Paul, did you see the questions that came through in Q&A?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm Paul Dittman. I'm with Compeer Financial, and I'm going to be asking some of the questions here at the end. The first question that came in, and this is really about crowdfunding. Are there any precedents for co-ops successfully using crowdfunding beyond membership, beyond going to their members and asking for the funds? So Joe and Deb, have you run into co-ops that have used this tool?
So we haven't had any issuers be co-ops in the past, but I don't believe there's anything in the statutes that would preclude a co-op from utilizing crowdfunding in the future.
Okay.
You do need to be organized as a business in Wisconsin. So it would just need to meet that requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so as long as it's not a nonprofit, or could it even be a nonprofit?
Not a nonprofit, no.
Okay. All right. Next question is about industrial revenue bonds. And can industrial revenue bonds be used for startup of a new enterprise?
Yes, it can. Again, it has to be a manufacturer. And because a bond is really a loan, a startup faces the same problems doing a bond as they would on any type of loan. And that is, there's no performance history or anything there. One way, a couple ways that can be done. One, your local banker likes the business plan and you get it together. I know Steve can talk about WEDC programs that might help a startup. The other way it can be done with a bond is an expensive route, but it's a type of bond that we call a project bond, where the bond goes to the market, goes out into a public offering to bondholders. In an extensive prospectus, they outline the feasibility study, the projections, the pro formas, And while their interest rate will be cheaper than it would have been if it wasn't a tax exempt bond, that type of bond is going to carry a pretty high interest rate on it because, again, the investor is trying to figure out whether this will be a successful business that's able to meet its debt service. But there is no per se prohibition in the IRB rules that would not allow it. It's simply a challenge from the lending side.
Okay. And Lynda, you said earlier, it's pretty typical when industrial revenue bonds are issued, the buyer ends up being the bank. Is that right?
Yeah, historically, we did a lot of bonds where the bonds were sold to the public. They were backed by a bank's letter of credit. With the changes in law, banks have to book a letter of credit as if it were a loan. So they have to book it on their books as if they actually advanced the money rather than that it was a letter of credit that could be called upon. And so as a result, since the bank faces the same risk that they would with a letter of credit, it's better for them to do it as a bank held, and it's much cheaper. There are fewer lawyers involved, a little less process. And so it's kind of a win-win for the borrower.
Okay, thank you. Joe and Deb, I had a couple more questions about the crowdfunding platform. And I've been kind of surprised that it hasn't been more widely utilized in Wisconsin. It seems like a great program. And especially for the types of folks I work with who are mostly smaller scale, value added type processing businesses. Does the crowdfunding platform or putting out an issuance, does it require an attorney, or would it be possible for a small business to do everything themselves?
It would be possible to do it themselves. Our statute lays out what you need to put in the disclosure document, and that does not need to be a huge prospectus type of document. As long as you include everything that we list in the statute, then it's going to be considered complete, I would expect. So yeah, I think, you know, in the right circumstance, you could probably manage without an attorney.
Okay.
And that'd be another instance where maybe using one of the
Right.
the Marquette or UW-Madison Entrepreneurship Clinic would be helpful, I think, because they have some experience with drafting those documents and working with us on that.
Is that why a lot of the issuances have been for microbreweries? I know some of the folks attached to the Law Entrepreneur Clinic at UW-Madison have a lot of connections in the microbrewing industry.
I think part of it is maybe because one of the earliest internet site operators that really helped push this was kind of focused in the brewery space. And so I think that's kind of what developed the initial attraction towards that area.
Okay.
I don't know. I think if you're asking people to invest their money, apparently in Wisconsin, folks just get fired up about beer.
Right.
That makes sense. You'd think maybe there'd be more cheese factories too then.
That would work, yeah.
We're ready.
And you mentioned that there was recently one of the breweries sold and are basically closing out their crowdfunding. Have you been tracking performance? I mean, because these businesses are promising a return on the funds that they're raising, right? Do you track whether they're actually paying back what they said they were going to pay back?
So anecdotally, we like to keep track of the different companies that have gone through the process. But in terms of a formalized process, not so much.
Okay. Right.
But yeah, I was just in preparation for this presentation, I noticed some things in the news about organic brewing. So that prompted me to ask more questions. We're still looking to hear back from them.
Okay, great. Thank you. John, I had a question about rural TIFs and whether you've seen them used very much for agricultural projects, you know, maybe a cheese factory or a meat processing plant, that sort of thing.
No, we generally don't. That section of the town, TID law, like I said, is not generally widely used. Where we do see, more use of it within, say, cheese manufacturers might be within some villages or cities. One of the ones I worked on a couple of years ago was in Waiwiga, for a pretty substantial upgrade to the to AgroPure that is there. But I think part of the challenge when you talk about some of these types of facilities is ultimately how much taxable value are these entities actually going to generate. And a lot of times the level of capital investment is quite a bit higher than the amount of value that is actually going to be taxed for property tax purposes. So that's one of the challenges I think that comes with this type of development.
Yeah, it's something we run into on the lending side too, because a lot of times the facilities don't appraise for what's needed to be put into them.
Right.
So a question for everyone. I'm wondering, what would it take to, for the particular tools that you've talked about, what would it take to have those tools more widely utilized in Wisconsin? Do we need more technical expertise at the local level? Do we need better outreach to local elected officials? What would it take to really get people using these tools?
Well, let me speak first to IRBs. Back in the day, I would probably do 20 IRBs in a year for small manufacturers. Now I might do 5 or 6. And the reason is not that the word isn't out there. Believe me, I go to every bank and every banker knows about it, and the WEDC promotes it. The reason in recent years has been the interest rate. Right now, that savings that you realize by having a tax-exempt bond is a direct reflection of where the conventional rates are and where the corporate tax rates are. And so let me give you an example. If a bank buys a bond, they're both the lender and the sole bondholder. They are actually discounting the conventional rate by a multiplier based on their corporate tax rate. They're not going to pay federal income tax on the interest income. They're at, a 22%. And so right now they're discounting by about 18%. If corporate tax rates go up, that multiplier, the discount will be greater. It'll be a reflection of their corporate tax rate. So if they were paying 30, they would discount it by 30% if they were paying in that bracket. But taken into consideration, so when corporate tax rates go up, we expect that bonds will be used more. When interest rates go up, strangely enough, we also expect they'll be used more, because right now the spread between the conventional and a discount of 18% of the conventional, the spread is very, very narrow. I said it's about $8,000 per $1 million of par. And on a small bond, to recover your cost of issuance would take a long time when the spread is that small. The larger the bond, the shorter the recovery time of the transactional costs. So three things will increase the use of bonds: expansion in the manufacturing sector, rising interest rates, and a higher corporate tax rate.
And I'll just tag on to what Lynda's saying. I mean, when the interest rates were on the high side, I remember back in the old days where the amount of volume cap that was requested exceeded what we had to offer. And as a result of that, Lynda remembers this, we used to have a competitive scoring process for these applications. And I know Lynda would call me up from time to time and ask me why a project of hers got the score that it did. So it was a very competitive process, but that was at a time when interest rates were on the high side. and demand exceeded what we had for allocation. Now that interest rates have been low, unfortunately, we're not using the allocation that we receive each year.
That makes sense.
One thing that we did not mention, but might facilitate the use of crowdfunding, is a more recent provision that allows a sort of a testing of the waters or a solicitation of interest process that you could use prior to doing an actual crowdfunding offering. And that's 26M in the statute, as opposed to 26, which is the actual crowdfunding statute.
Right, so if someone was maybe thinking about it, but wasn't quite sure if this is a good fit, because there are lots of different options for raising capital. Maybe they're just trying to figure out if there's any appetite in the market at all for what they're trying to sell. That's a good way to kind of, see if there's a path forward.
Good, great.
I think I would just, by saying within tax incremental finance, across the state, tax incremental financing is pretty heavily used. Not quite as much on the rural side because it is a little bit more restrictive, but it really, again, because it's the only tool in the toolbox, most municipalities have either had a district or have multiple districts, currently.
Yeah, I think I told you, I used to be on the village board here in Prairie du Sac. We've had a number of TIF districts and have worked with Ehlers over the years. But I've always wondered why it's not being utilized in smaller towns where we have manufacturing facilities that need to expand and could create jobs in areas that really need them. Well, any other questions from any of the participants? Nothing else has been popping up in the Q&A box, but we've got just a couple minutes left here if anyone has any burning questions that you want to get answered.
If I can just bring up, Lynda talked earlier about whether IRBs could be used for startups. I want to also mention that here at WDC, we do have a loan program that is geared towards technology-based startup companies that are working on introducing a new product or service to the market. This could be a loan for their R&D work, or could even be a loan to help them get the product or service into the marketplace. Just a recent example of how that program works is within the last year, I underwrote a technology development loan for a company that had come up with a new formulation for producing an organic form of deodorant. So they were able to tap into the TDL program to help them get that into the marketplace and to improve on that formulation. So if you go to the website wedc.org, there's information about that and who you can contact for more information as well.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So when you say technology, you're not talking just like web-based technology sorts of things.
No, I mean, it could be some type of new technology in the manufacture. I mean, it could be a whole different way of manufacturing a product. I'm working on one right now where they've come up with a way to put these sensors into, let's say, school buildings that provides real-time information to the authorities on an active shooter situation. So this is something that is really not being offered right now for those types of situations. So that's another example of who can access this program.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve. All right, well, if no one else has any questions, I think we'll call it a day here. And thanks all of you for being willing to participate and share your expertise. This has been a great webinar. Kirsten, do you want to wrap it up and tell us, I think this has been recorded, and so people will be able to access these presentations after the fact, right?
Yeah, that's correct. We'll send out the link that you can view the recording after we get it uploaded and all of that. So again, thank you so much to all of our panelists today. Really appreciate it. And thank you to all of the participants who are joining us today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.